Welcome to episode 13 of VW Exchange. The number gets greater and greater every time. It's scaring me, but excited. How we doing?
Doing good. Doing good. I just saw a statistic. I think only 1% of podcasts make it to episode 20. So I'm hoping we can keep pushing and by the end of the summer we'll be hitting that milestone. So
Whoa, that is
yeah.
crazy. 1% of podcasts make it to
Crazy, right?
that's achievable. We could be a 1% podcast. Amazing.
Gotta keep grinding.
For sure. And when we have been grinding, we put together some nice stories on the docket, and yeah, hopefully learn along with you here as always. But I think the biggest news that we had was on July 4th, this past Friday, of Trump signing his big beautiful bill. Initial thoughts, James.
Yeah, it took a little bit, a lot of negotiations back and forth, Senate and the House. Wanted to remove some things, add some things, but it's finally in place. It's going to add $3.3 trillion to the deficit over the coming years, but it's an extension of the 2017 tax cuts, cuts to SNAP Medicaid, cuts to clean energy, cuts to defense, or not cuts, sorry, excuse me. Um, More defense funding, and also border funding. So we'll kind of jump into some of these things, but overall, very pro bi business friendly doc for sure.
Absolutely. And I think like the big question here, which is what you kind of brought up, is on like the deficit and also like what that means for business. Because I think as like we saw earlier with some of the spikes that we've seen in the bond market, is that the capital markets will force you to react based on like how they view the deficit, whether they believe that there is a good enough growth story behind the U.S. to invest in its debt. And I think that remains to be seen. Um, I think that when I look at this graph below here with the $4.5 trillion of tax cut extensions being like that being a major cost on our credit card, and that these other cuts as making to Medicaid, green energy, SNAP with food stamps, that those kind of pale in comparison to 4.5 trillion. But I think that what we can hope, and I don't know if that this takes this into account or not, is that this GDP increase, that the income increase on corporations coming into America, on capital inflows coming into America, are going to at least partially offset that. But maybe this is where I pass it to you and kind of get your take on that, whether you see that as feasible or whether you think that this is going to be tough for the U.S. to pay its way out of.
Yeah, that's the big question, and we can hope that these cuts are going to improve our business spending, draw people to draw people to start businesses in the United States, increase our GDP, and we can tie this back into our AI conversation later. But um, it's a huge, as you were saying, kind of this graph we have going on is it's showing how much we're gonna be saving versus um spending, and the tax cuts are, if you're watching, it's a lot bigger than sort of the savings that we're creating. So it's the hope is that it's going to fuel business, but it is going to increase that deficit, which people have a lot of questions about. I was just looking at a graph recently. In Trump's last term, he added the same, around the same amount to the deficit as Obama did in his two terms. And Biden also increased it a lot. Everyone just keeps pushing it off, but it's been at a real exponential climb in the last 2 decades. Not inflation adjusted, but it is starting to reach a worrying number. And as we see how the treasury market's going to react, and you're going to see this yield spike, investors are going to require a larger return for sort of this risk-free asset becoming more risky. So interesting.
Right. I think that's all 100% right. And I think one of the other things that I want to just bring up as part of this bill and just like how it's constructed was thinking about where we're making the savings and the programs that we're cutting, that Medicaid in particular brings health insurance to poor people. SNAP food stamps obviously help. People who don't have as much resources be able to get groceries at a discount. So I think that those things, it is kind of a real question for the U.S. of what's going to be the government's role in that long term. Are we going to have nonprofits and churches, take that over? Because fundamentally, is this like a moral argument, or is this a business argument that we need money in the hands of poor people because they're going to spend it as opposed to rich people who are going to save it and invest it, which is also certainly important. Like we definitely need investment, but we also definitely need consumption for these small businesses to thrive. So I think kind of watching how that develops and like the political rhetoric around that, I think it's going to be important too.
Yeah, you bring up good points there. And it's kind of just this whole trickle down theory sort of thing that I was looking into. Something that was really popularized by Reagan back in the day. Kind of just supplying these cuts to the rich. And, while it can improve inflation and improve growth, it can kind of, we do kind of see the income inequality sort of broaden a little further. And we also do see struggles with the deficit. So that's something else to sort of look into. But that's kind of the big picture there as you were sort of talking about. But yeah, where are we gonna what is better? Is it better to um kind of provide those lower income subsidies, or is it better to let businesses run wild and hope that that can help create more jobs and make our country better overall? I don't know. That's the question.
Right. And anybody who comes to you and like says that, oh, it's like this is so obviously the solution, I think that they're lying to you because this stuff is very hard. These are like super big trade-offs that we're thinking about. And I think in trickle-down economics, I think that there are things here that certainly make a lot of sense. That if you get the companies that now take AI for an example, that are on this AI wave and that you're going to have these technologies harbored in the US and that all the jobs surrounding the manufacturing, surrounding the software, hardware is all going to be in the US, then I think that has to be a net positive to just everybody in the country. And whether that is through some sort of tax redistribution later on, whether that is through just like the creation of jobs or the creation of cheaper, more efficient products, that kind of remains to be seen. Um, but obviously, obviously, big kind of topics that we're tackling here and stuff. I'm sure we'll come back to.
Yeah. Tough questions to be had, and we could talk about this all day on the pod, but we'll move on to kind of what's been going on with the dollar. Very closely correlated with sort of what's going on and yields, but the dollar's headed to for its worst first half performance since 1973, which is really kind of out of the ordinary and something that we're not used to, at least in our lifetime. Um, kind of so just to kind of explain how this works, basically our currency is, I mean, as it sounds, it's less valuable. So when we buy things overseas, it takes more of our money to get it. And then when people are buying things from us, US exports, it's more inexpensive to them. So there are goods and bads, but I want to see kind of, Adam, why do you think this is sort of happening? Why is this important?
I think it's important for a few reasons. I think that there are a couple things that are like short-term and long-term consequences, and I think that The short-term consequences are probably net positive. I think that the one thing that is negative is that your US dollars are going to buy less French wine and foreign imports to the US. But what it does do, and I think that this is why like this kind of policy is appealing to Trump, is that it does help make our goods more cheap overseas, and that's going to help US manufacturing, US services. And the other thing that importantly it'll do is on the debt side is that it's going to make our payments effectively less because we're paying in US dollars to these foreign bondholders, largely in China, and just making China eat that cost. So that's the short term. But in the long term, the reason why a lot of people want to hold US dollars and hold US debt, which we need them to do, obviously, to keep kind of these low interest rates, which we've kind of seen fall apart. But those rates are going to go way up if people say we don't trust US reserves, we don't trust Trump, which I think is kind of part of the reason for this decline in the dollar. And I think that that would be bad for the US or something that it would have to adjust to.
Hmm. Yeah, it's kind of like this overarching theme. It's almost the end of globalism, or at least that's what Trump's goal is. He wants everything to be in-house. We don't need to export, we don't need to import things, but if you want to export from us, that's great. Tariffs, I know that's almost gone quiet, and we'll talk about it more later, but it is starting to come back into play. But this is the overall theme of the administration and what we have going on right now. But maybe maybe that is his goal to drive down the dollar and keep it circulating around the United States and prevent us from over importing. But as you were saying, with in terms of the yields, um, if our currency is going down in value, then investors aren't gonna place their money here because when they try to convert their returns, it's just gonna be worth less, as you were saying in the China
Mhm.
example. So that is something to be wary of, and rising treasuries when it gets too high, it deters investment in other assets. So all things to kind of keep in mind, and it all kind of works into each other.
This almost reminds me of that Ray Dalio article that we read for I don't know, maybe like 6 episodes ago. And like all this stuff is so intertwined. And then when you have an approach like Trump, that is America first, hence like we want to kind of separate ourselves a little bit from this globalist project. And that's something that is turning out to be really hard to do. I think because these are such complex dynamics, but I think that what we've already seen by the dollar going down is that there is less trust there, and I think generally a lot of these policies are going to be very good in the short term and are going to kind of make it so that Trump says from 2020 or 2024 whatever that we've done great, and look at me, and whoever the Democrat who comes next is going to be like I have to deal with all this stuff. But that may not to make this like too political or anything, because all these policies like have their advantages and drawbacks. But that kind of is my preliminary read.
Yeah, and it's basically party agnostic. Every Democrats, Republicans have been driving up the deficit forever, and especially in recent years, it's gotten really bad. And what we kind of have the deficit for is for downturns and for when the economy needs to get going. We hope that we can kind of tap in there and maybe extend our debt, but we're using up debt at record levels, and it's just unsustainable, and we're gonna have to pay it down at some point, and whether that's the next election or the election after that, but it's going to have to become more of a priority. But for now, everyone just kind of wants to bump up their achievements while they're in office, and the next guy's got it.
Yeah, and and I hope that'll be the case. But this might be a good time to pivot into this graph that I have below here, and this is just on the makeup of financial asset allocation across households, mutual funds, pension funds, foreign investors. But what it generally shows is that I'm looking that since 2012, since basically the great financial crisis, 2008, that the concentration of equities has gone way up and gone up to 53%. People's credit holdings, as far as the bonds that they own, is going down. Cash, it seems, has kind of stayed at a lower point. And I just thought this graph was interesting and kind of wanted your takes on it as a markets guy on what people are holding and the risks associated with it.
Yeah, this big influx into equities, kind of where we're at right now is looks like 53% equity, 18% debt, 13% cash, and the rest of that is filled in by other sorts of investments. But it's been climbing pretty fast, and I think there's a lot of things that you can attribute to it. But right now, it is this kind of AI boom that's really powering the markets, and everyone wants to be in it right now. And it does get scary when you do think about the dot-com bubble and you think about things like that. But I think that it is matched with some with better results. The dot-com bubble was sort of these companies had nothing to show for their valuations, and people were just pumping money in with expectations, but expectations are really high and price to earning ratios are climbing. And also Mag 7 concentration is something we've talked about a lot, but it a lot of the US growth has been attributed to those seven companies, like Tesla, Alphabet, Apple, Microsoft, and all those guys. But and it's it's a little bit concerning to see something like this, but it also on the other side of the coin, it is good for growth. But I don't know, I want to pass it back to you because it is sort of a daunting metric.
Right. And like I don't want to be the doomsday guy, especially as a 20-year-old who doesn't quite understand like the whole larger context of this. But what I will say is that like there does seem to be just risky behavior that I don't think that you would see if we were in and if we had a crisis recently. But we did have a major downturn post Liberation Day. But I think like some of the stuff that we see as far as like these levered option funds or people who all these random Bitcoins, meme coins, whatever it is, I think that that's stuff that might just signal that like somewhere there might be excessive risk taking and maybe that's not in Mag 7 stocks that have been the ones that have really held up the economy, but I think just making sure before you invest in one of these that you're investing not because you think it's going to go up, but you see a clear earning story that is justifiable based on, however you're viewing whatever ratios you're looking at. Because when I think about AI, I do just have questions about where it gets monetized because like when I poke stuff into ChatGPT, like I'm paying $20 a month, so it feels pretty good to have super intelligence for $20 a month. But I don't know how much you'll get just an average Joe college student like me to pony up. But I don't know. How do you see this?
I don't know. I mean, sometimes it really concerns me just when you look at some of like the telltale signs, like you have Meta offering $100 million signing bonus to software engineers to come in, or even something we'll talk about later, just the sheer amount of CapEx that these companies are deploying right now and kind of reducing their bottom line. But it's a lot of investment into this, and there's a lot of expectations and hope for growth. But like you said, I mean, where this monetization is going to come in, is it going to really optimize businesses? Is it really going to reduce their expenses, generate returns? I guess we'll see. But and something else that I also saw that was very interesting was that if you remove the Mag 7 from S&P 500 in the last maybe decade or so, there are a lot of international different countries who beat our market,
Hmm.
which is something very interesting to kind of think about. And if these companies don't end up doing what they say they can do, that could just absolutely take a ton of valuation out of the market and really, I don't know, cause some problems.
Right. That very interesting point on the international front because there are so many emerging markets out there that just, once all the pieces fall into place, I really think politically is kind of the big thing that needs to fall into place of having just stable institutions where investors know that they're properly protected in courts, that places like India, places like Brazil, places that just have a big young workforce and India especially where education has gotten very good and there's a widening middle class that like once some of these other markets come online, that money has to go from somewhere, and usually the U.S. has had the good fortune of a lot of foreign investors coming into its market, but like when we see the time that those foreign investors go elsewhere, U.S. investors might follow suit and start looking at some of these other markets. So I think that that's certainly something to keep aware of too, and really great point you bring up.
Yeah, there's a lot of talent out there, a lot of great markets that are gonna do well. And if we're closing ourselves off a little bit more, just gives them more runway to go. And if we, I think, as we were talking about before, the nothing ever happens market, DeepSeek and its sort of emergence was a real shock to our market. And it just seems like we sort of forgot about that, or the market wants to forget about that, and it wants to forget about tariff pauses resuming, and it wants to forget about other metrics that we have going on. And it just seems like it could be due for when something goes wrong, or if hiring really starts to slow, if things start to unravel a little bit, it could do so very, very quickly.
Yeah. Yeah, this could be a good time to get into this AI story that I
Yeah.
got on the real estate side. And this will be quick, but there was a interesting story that came out. This is from BizNow, and this is Meta, which is a parent company of Facebook, Instagram, that is looking like that they're trying to gear up to raise a data center fund using some private equity titans, Apollo, KKR, Brookfield, and they're going to raise this fund around Meta's data center needs. Meta needs to build certain data centers, and they need the power associated with them as well. But what they're using these private equity firms for is that they're going to help take off some of the equity from the table that Meta needs to put up, and it's going to come from some of these other players who have a lot of that money to put in. But one of the things I thought was interesting was that I think all the equity going into this project was $3 billion and $26 billion of debt. So companies like Meta who have a ton of money in their coffers, still electing to use credit instead. And I thought this was kind of an interesting, like thinking about risk taking as well. Kind of your just initial thoughts on the piece.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think they're raising $30 billion for this project. Not a small amount of money, and like you were saying, a lot of it coming from the debt side. So maybe they have a lot more projects kind of on deck here, and they want to reserve equity for a lot of them and keep pouring debt into it so they can diversify themselves and get involved in a lot of different areas. And they are trying to scale right now. It's almost like like race to the moon. Like Amazon, Google, OpenAI, everyone's trying to collect these data centers and produce this energy that powers AI. And this isn't, I mean, this is an absolute gold rush in the real estate industry as well. And people are willing to provide debt and equity, whatever they need to fund these projects. They just want to be a part of it. And I don't know. This is where I get concerned about bubble potential because I looked it up. Meta this year is projected to spend $72 billion on CapEx. For perspective, in 2021, which was just 4 years ago, they spent 18 billion. So
Whoa.
that number has more than tripled in 4 years. And Mark Zuckerberg has publicly stated that he expects CapEx to hit the hundreds of billions in the next couple of years. So this is where I get concerned, and it's like, is this necessary when you have someone like DeepSeek who can come in with an absolute fraction of the spending and produce similar results, and you have to worry about security. I know that was an issue there, potentially stealing ideas and stealing the technology, but I don't know. This is where I get concerned. I don't know how you feel about that.
I similarly am concerned. Like when I hear those CapEx numbers, I'm like, what investors are assuming is that the return on that equity and the return on those investments is going to be massive, double digits, like 20 plus, whatever. And thinking that that's going to happen is I think just concerning at the pace that this is happening, and we mentioned the DeepSeek scare and like what are going to be the needs for data, and I think that there's going to certainly be a big need for data, but I think making sure that you're in the right spots is going to be something that is really important because thinking about this piece, right? I think that what makes this 90% loan to cost and like all that debt possible is that people have a real belief in Meta because it has a great credit rating. It's sitting on a ton of cash, doesn't have that many liabilities relative to how much the company's worth. And it's going to be a tenant in all these. So it's going to build it for itself and it's going to operate them. So I think that helps de-risks it for the debt markets. Um, but I mean that number is really eye-popping because that's something that we simply don't see, and that if one of these goes belly up, and all of a sudden Meta says, "Okay, we're walking away from these. We don't need half as many data centers as we thought we did," then I think that we're in a really bad spot. Especially because, I mean, how many people can win this AI game, right? Like, we're not going to be using five different AIs, like you said. Like, it could be very well that it's just ChatGPT is the first mover, and all these guys, they're just too late.
I'm already hooked on ChatGPT. I don't use Gemini, I don't use any other ones, but yeah, as you were saying, I mean, even if let's say AI does help tremendously, it might not help as much as people are pricing it in to work, and maybe some of these data centers aren't even necessary, or it's going to be interesting to see how it unfolds. But staying on the topic of real estate, I wanted to jump into a couple of uh new provisions with the big beautiful bill and how this is going to help the real estate market, which has really been struggling. Rates have been high for too long. Construction costs are high as well, but there's a couple of provisions I wanted to talk about. One of them is the 100% bonus depreciation is restored. This is something that was implemented back in 2017, but has kind of been waning in percentage until the projected day was 2027, but now it's going to be restored. So basically, these businesses can immediately expense their assets, any asset that was built after, I believe, January 19th in 2025. So this is going to save them a lot of money, great tax write down. It's going to be able to fund a lot of projects, and also Opportunity Zone, which something else that's been kind of reinstated, and it's incentives for developers to build in economically underserved areas and get a break on their capital gains tax. So a couple of cool things, and I would like to hear maybe Adam how you think this is going to play out, or how helpful really is this?
I think that this is really great news to be able to, get all that tax savings up front. I think that that's something that I know from our banking prep is going to increase cash flow, and it's certainly going to be welcome for all these developers. And I think I like it as far as just fixing a housing crisis, fixing a lot of the problems we've been dealing with. You have to make it more attractive to developers and just show that you care about their interests as well as a landlord and want to incentivize them to build. So I think that this is something that I really like. And I think that what I was reading that this is for properties that have 1 to 20 year lives. So not necessarily every commercial real estate asset, but it does cover like land improvements. So properties that need a ton of value add work, properties that you're fixing up, that this is going to be huge for a lot of these things that need deferred maintenance, where right now it doesn't pencil, but maybe after this bill it does.
Yeah, those car wash sort of like lucrative projects that just weren't feasible before are gonna be possible, and real estate markets at a tough point in the cycle. So hopeful that this can have some have some good benefits. But something else that we saw in the bill was sort of um a lot of the repealing of environmentally friendly subsidies that were going out, solar, EVs. Um, Very interesting. Tom Pyle, who's president of the Pro Oil and Gas Group American Energy Alliance, said, if repealing these subsidies will kill their industry, then maybe it shouldn't exist in the first place. So, a lot of strong feelings there, but I wanted to see what you think about all this. This is something kind of major going on, and it's affecting some of these environmentally friendly businesses.
Yes, and I think I have a couple thoughts on this. The first one is what well I agree with some of what Tom Pyle's saying here, and it was funny. I was going to paste the same quote, and then I saw that you already did it. But I think that like this quote, part of me thinks that the Republicans are somewhat subservient to big oil interests, and that a lot of their politicians are funded by folks like Energy Alliance and Tom Pyle. So I think that that is one thing that just gives me caution about the quote in the statement. But what I do think is that a lot of these energy related products are already on the way, and folks like Tesla who are trying to roll out EVs, they're already super well capitalized. So I think as far as what tax incentives they need is probably not much because they're already able, they have really easy access to equity capital markets, debt capital markets. So I think that shouldn't be an issue. And I think it also lends itself to making sure that we're picking the right clean energy player in this race between solar, water, wind, geothermal, nuclear, and that we're picking whatever's going to be most efficient because we can keep propping a lot of these industries up, but if there's one that has a better return on investment than the others, then I think all the energy should go in that place. And we were reading this Meta article earlier about how it's signing agreements with solar contractors and nuclear contractors. So just making sure that the ones who are doing their bidding the most effectively should be the ones who win out.
Right. Yeah, and you look at some of them like wind, maybe not as efficient, not as cost effective. Trump has been an advocate for nuclear energy, and I actually read something that he's working on something with Governor Kathy Hochul of New York, and they're looking to get some nuclear projects going here. But something to consider, and very interesting just how the dynamic switched just in a few years. It seemed like everyone just wanted clean energy. We're done with oil, and then inflation, rising prices kind of got people back on the drill, baby drill wave. That was Trump's trademark slogan, but something else to kind of consider here with this bill.
Right. And like another just good example of short term, long term of that, maybe drilling more is our solution in the short term, but like when Tom Pyle says maybe maybe these subsidies shouldn't exist in the first place, is that like the reason they exist is because we can't drill forever, at least according to our science friends. So hopefully some of these other solutions come out and are in really good shape. But now maybe we can just pivot into this final wrap up around what the tariffs rolling off and what we should be expecting as we move into August and we hope to see some of these deals come through. Yeah, what should we be looking for here?
It seems like everyone kind of forgot that a lot of these these tariff solutions were just 90-day pauses, and that was the hot topic forever. It still sort of is, but simmered down a little bit. The market just capped off new highs. Seemed like everyone forgot, but the original deadline was July 9th for a lot of these pauses, and Scott Besson and Trump kind of saying that it might be more like August 1st when tariffs are really going to come back into play. But as we've kind of talked about, what were the real goals of tariffs? It seems like Trump is doubling back down on there actually being tariffs and wanting other countries to pay and all that. So something else to watch for as we've seen a market that just doesn't really care about anything. Might be in for a real shock if these tariffs go into play.
Agreed, agreed. And I think Trump has showed time and time again that he means what he says more than we think, and that when he says that he might bomb Iran, he bombed it. He went in there and did that. So I think taking them more literally than people have in the past, I think would be good guidance for the market.
Yep. We'll see how it all unfolds and we'll keep you guys updated. But thank you again for listening and have a good week, guys.
Take care.